بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is Abu Ayyub from Muslim Apologetics Podcast, and I'm here today with our brother Jamshed, who has worked with in the Dawah scene for quite a number of years, and he has put together basically an introduction to Dawah and how you could learn, or what would be the tools you would need if you're starting out and want to enter into the Dawah scene, and you need to know what type of logic and what type of Christian doctrine you would need to know at first. So, assalamu alaikum, brother.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Well, let's dive into it then. So, what is epistemology?
Epistemology is the study of knowledge, but it's a very big word. Let's ignore that and let's just get straight into it, inshallah. Okay, so we're going to be basically, this whole section in a roundabout way, we're going to be discussing where does knowledge come from? How is it that anyone, that we know anything? And what we have to recognize is that to know something, we use a lot of different sources of information. So you can see on the chart here that there are things that are self-evident, that you don't need evidence for. So for example, a bachelor is a person who is unmarried. You don't need evidence for that. The very fact that he's a bachelor necessitates that he is an unmarried person. You have information from your senses, you have your own experience, experimentation, calculations, yada, yada, yada. So knowledge itself comes from a lot of different areas. It's not one-dimensional. So that's just one thing to bear in mind from the outset. And let's see how this actually works. So, question for all of you, and I would appreciate answers, please. So we might have to enable some mics, which is, what color is my car?
All right. I would have to open up. Let me see.
I don't know.
I would say if you want me to answer, I couldn't give a logical answer because it needs to be based upon some prior information, knowledge before I'd make a statement. I can make a guess, but if it was educated guess, well, I'm basing it on nothing. The only thing I have right now, I would say it's probably yellow because you have this yellow background.
Okay. I mean, what are we going to do with the others? Because this kind of needs to be interactive for you guys to learn it and get it properly.
I'll unmute everybody, but hopefully it's not anarchy. Usually the way that we...
How about if we just get them to type their answers?
Okay, we can... If brothers, you want to type in your answers if you're listening.
No, seriously, I want you guys to actually work out what the color of my car is. And I want you to think about this because, and not only that, think about how you're coming up with an answer. So, all right, so Brother Abu Ayyub has mentioned yellow, and he's used the reason because he presumes I like the color yellow because that's the color of my course. Okay, fair enough. I don't know how many yellow cars there are actually on the streets of the UK, but it's a very... it's not a very popular color, so it's not a very strong guess from that perspective, unless I was driving a Ferrari or a Lamborghini.
Yeah.
Okay, so Brother Mansour says red. Any particular reason why red? See, and what I'm getting at here is you guys are coming up with answers. You know, let's also think about what's the reasons, what's the basis for this?
It's either based upon your own perceptions of what you're putting into it, of what your experience is, or what you've taken from your experience from that individual before you, you know. So it's always external. There's things that are coming external that actually add into why you would reach that conclusion. So that's what
okay. So Hashim asks, do I have a car? Which is an excellent question. Because the very question itself, you know, when I say what color is my car, can you presume that I have a car from that? Because you see, this idea that I have a car, is it implied or is it something that is definite, that you know for a fact I have a car? Because I could just say, well, it's no color because I don't have one. So you see, these are all the factors in the question that I want you guys to start or being able to do to dissect the question as a whole. What are all of the assumptions that are floating around your brain. Do I even have a car? What are the likely colors for the car? What are the likely colors that I would have for a car? Yada, yada, yada. Someone has seen my car is red because they've seen my profile picture. Okay. All right. So let's show you this. Right. So hopefully everyone can see that. Now, what color is my car? I'm going to ask you again.
It's candy apple red.
Okay. Candy apple red. So we'll just call it red. Is there anyone here who disagrees with it being red? We'll give a second for that answer. Okay, so Jean, I don't know where you're from and how you're going to pronounce that. Not Jean from X-Men, I guess. Okay, good. Hamza says he doesn't think that's my car. Why not? Oh, okay. No, the one in the center of the picture. So, Brother Hamza, why do you not believe that this is my car? Because look, that definitely is me standing on it. It was a few years ago. It looks like a monster truck. It is a monster truck, actually. It's a monster truck when they came to my hometown. But why can that not be my car? I mean, surely if a monster truck exists, somebody must own it. So why not me? Not sure I would be driving that down the road. Why not? Let's elaborate a little bit more.
Well, from what we know in society, these types of cars, they're not road safe. So it wouldn't be. It could be your car, but it's not going to be There's an implication even with the word car. That means your day-to-day vehicle that you're using for transportation. Yeah. So
exactly,
it would be assumed that this type of car. I mean, you could probably use it, but if you have foreknowledge of what these types of monster trucks, how they work, and what's the laws of the city and so on and so forth, there's some implications that might
sure. Plus, I mean, at the end of the day, this is a car. I mean, monster trucks are used to crush cars, so very clearly this is not going to be legal driving up and down the street. Not only that, but they consume 8 liters of pure alcohol for 1 mile of travel. So it's not very practical. It's ridiculously loud. It's too big for the roads. It's just not legal. And yeah, you see, here's the point. Regardless of the fact that I'm standing on it, the most plausible explanation, because here's the point now. You have visual evidence that I am the one in control, for the want of a better phrase, of this vehicle. So just by looking at the picture alone, you could assume that it's mine. It's my car. However, there is other information that we see from it. So we can see that it's labeled Monster Jam, which is a monster truck organization. We know the nature of, well, I guess people who are interested in monster trucks know the nature of this organization, that they travel around, they put cars on display. We know the nature of the vehicle, that it can't be a day-to-day car, yada, yada, yada. The point is, we can use our knowledge from a lot of other sources. Forget what we're seeing. A lot of other sources to directly contradict the idea or the perception that this is my car. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So what I want you to try and get into the mindset of is, when we know something to be true or false, how much does all of the information correlate, or is the information contradictory? So here it appears that the information actually is not really that strong in affirming that this is my car. So you can't really take the color of this vehicle as being the color of my car. Okay? So let's have a look at this one. What about this one? So now what's the color of my car?
Still don't know if it's your car.
Sorry?
We still don't know if it's your car or not.
Well, okay. Well, why would this not be my car? Because, this is people do own Ferraris. Ferraris is a road legal car. I suppose this is probably harder for you guys, being as you guys can't see how I normally have my day-to-day appearance, but I'm normally dressed in jeans, a t-shirt, and sandals or slippers. So you guys might say that, I really don't carry myself or look like someone who drives a Ferrari around.
Yeah.
Am I very wealthy? Alhamdulillah, I have my health, I have my limbs, I have my faculties. The hadith, according to the hadith, yeah, I am wealthy. Am I wealthy enough to own one of these? No. So, but you see the point here being that now when we're talking about Ferrari, yeah, it is an elite car, but it's a lot more plausible that I could potentially own this than the monster truck itself.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And here's another important point. It's the same color as the monster truck. So also don't forget, just because the monster truck wasn't my car doesn't mean my car is not red. Because my car could still be red despite the fact that it wasn't a monster truck. So it's a case of understanding where one thing can lead to another and not impinge on another thing. Okay? So the last picture I'm going to show you is, by the way, have any of you guys ever flown Egyptian Airways? Has anyone been to Cairo airport? Because the Egyptians do something very, very peculiar with their planes. The way that they get their planes to fly is by using magic to make them lighter than air. And they've demonstrated this outside Cairo airport. So here you see they've applied this same technology to a rock, and you can see that the rock is now starting to fly and float away and has to be held down by another rock. This is a genuine picture. I took this myself outside Cairo airport. What are you guys' thoughts with regards to that?
Looks Photoshopped to me.
Okay, I'm guaranteeing you it's a genuine picture.
Yeah.
It's a genuine picture.
Well, again, if I was to employ the information that we do have today of how natural world works, anybody can make a claim, but if it goes against the natural world that we know, then it would be difficult to
But you see planes fly, don't you? Planes are heavier than this rock, and you see them flying in the air.
Yeah,
so
but
what's
we
the problem
have.
Here?
Well, the difference between that is that we understand how those function and what's used. It's not just a hunk of metal that's just automatically flies. It's they have to employ fuel and torque and these things to actually move the plane in the air. So it's a little bit different. This is just floating in the air. So I would assume, if I was to look at this, I would assume that that's metal in between that's holding it up. And then, but then of course, my foreknowledge of metal, could a metal bar that skinny actually hold up a rock that heavy? Still questionable to me, but.
Okay, well, Hamza, to answer your question, the rocks have absolutely nothing to do with my car. The whole point of this exercise was just to get you to explore the different sources of information, of knowledge. Here you have a picture and my own assertion that it is a genuine photograph of real rocks versus your prior knowledge of how rocks behave, how gravity works, yada, 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 to try and come up with some rational conclusion as to what the truth of the matter is. So this I'm just exploring the whole point of epistemology here, or determining how do you come to knowledge, because when something is the truth, you'll find that all sources of knowledge point to that truth and affirm that truth. But when there is falsehood, you'll find that there are some sources of knowledge that will expose that falsehood. And that's why, when you're looking at something, if you want to try and expose the falsehood in it, you might have to try and look at different sources of information to test it. But at this early point, I just want to explore the idea with you that the way that you know things is by using a lot of different sources of knowledge, and you combine them to come up with some kind of a conclusion. But yeah, the rock itself it's not floating, it's a sculpture. There is actually, the rock itself is pinned to the ground by a metal pole, and you see inside the rope there is another metal pole that is actually holding the rock up. So it's not floating away and being held down, it's actually being held up and made to look like that. That's basically the point. Okay, so question for you guys then. We hear this term proof being bandied around all the time, especially from atheists, where they want proof of this, proof of that, proof that God exists, yada, yada, yada. So my question to you is, the word proof, what exactly defines proof? Brother Hamza, it's silver. Just, I will update the slides and I will put an actual picture of it in, but it is silver. So, question, guys, what defines proof exactly? Can any of you give me a definition of proof? Evidence, testimonials. I wouldn't say that's proof on its own. Okay, let's come to the first question here. Is there something that any of you feel confident that you can prove? What do you guys think that you can prove? Do you guys think that you can prove you're alive? Who thinks that they can prove that they're a real person, that they're alive? That they have a heart beating inside of them, that they have a real brain. What do you guys think? Anyone here capable of doing that? Okay. Yeah, good, Brother Mansour. Again, it depends on what we mean by proof, and that's the whole point of what we're exploring. So let's explore, what can you prove? Can you prove something? Just think anything. Okay, let's just take this Leicester example. Hamza, how do you prove that?
1 minute. Okay, now that is mine now, okay?
Oh, am I live now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Right. Okay. Proof, it's obviously in photos. It could be Photoshop.
It can be photoshopped, yeah.
Exactly. The news.
And the news is never fake.
Testimonial.
And people never lie.
Multitude testimonial.
And groups of people never lie.
The TV never lies.
The TV has no foreknowledge of what it's saying. It just repeats. Anything else?
Damn me, mate.
Huh? Think about it, guys. Let's just go right to the crux. How many of you guys actually think that you can prove that you are alive, that you are a real person?
I watched them lift I watched them lift the trophy.
You watched them lift. Okay. I didn't see. How'd you prove that to me? I didn't see it. Prove it to me.
I'll show you a video of them lifting the trophy.
How do I know that's not
newspapers supporting that they lifted the trophy, and I'll show TV that they lifted the trophy, and all the Leicester City fans will testify they lifted a trophy.
Faked. All of that could be faked. Here's the point. Okay, let me. Well, again, what odds are you calculating by which? Here's the question: how many of you can actually prove that you're not just some brain in a jar on someone's desk, and that your brain is being probed into thinking that this is reality? Could you prove that? And the answer is, by the way, I don't know what we're doing for time, so I'm not going too fast because I actually want you guys to explore this issue properly. But the reality is, I hope you'll eventually come to the conclusion that you can't actually prove it. You cannot prove that you're not just some brain in a jar and blah, 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 blah on someone's desk, right? Blah, 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 blah. So it's important to understand what we mean by proof, because normally when an atheist is asking for proof, what they're actually asking for is, and they don't say these words out loud, but this is actually what they're impliedly asking, is, can absolute indisputable proof exist? Brother Sohail, we'll get to that. Can absolute indisputable proof exist? Because actually what they're asking for, And the atheist is saying, prove to me X, Y, or Z, prove to me that God exists. What he's actually asking for is absolute, indisputable proof. So the question is, does it exist? What do you guys think? Yes or no? I want you to really think about the word here. Absolute, indisputable proof.
Well, everything can be disputable in some way or another. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly the point. The fact is, everything, anything can be disputed. Therefore, by definition, there can be no such thing that is regarded as indisputable. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
This is a very core point that I want you guys to understand, that there can be no such thing that is regarded as absolutely indisputable. Because a person, if he really wants to argue with you, he will even dispute that the sun is shining in the sky right there in front of him. Because they can. So the point being, this concept of absolute indisputable proof does not exist. And being as it doesn't exist, it cannot be used as a standard for truth. Okay? Furthermore, and this is where it starts to get fun and interesting, this position of requesting absolute indisputable proof as a basis for truth is a self-defeating position. What do I mean by that? What I mean is there is no absolute indisputable proof that absolute indisputable proof should be taken as the standard for truth. If there's no absolute indisputable proof that should be taken as the standard for truth, it means the principle itself is false by its own standard. Does that make sense?
Well, I would say I would term this a little bit differently. If you were to come at me and I'm playing devil's advocate, I would just say, well, let's just change the terminology and let's just say facts. And then we define what is facts.
Yeah, we're going to come to that. We'll come to all of that.
Yeah.
What I want you guys to understand first here is just the terminology here and some of the linguistic word trips. Because a lot of this argumentation, it comes down to, in being able to detect certain things, it comes down to understanding the nuances of particular positions. So that's why I know it seems a little bit mundane, but there is a method to my madness in going through this. And inshallah, by the end, it'll all become clear. This is just the easiest way to explain it. So you guys have to give me the benefit of the doubt that we'll get to a conclusion and it'll make sense. But I want you guys to just be aware of this fact that when people are asking for proof, generally speaking, what they're saying in brackets is they want absolute indisputable proof. And I want you guys to be aware that there is no such thing as absolute indisputable proof, that it itself is a self-defeating statement. So anyone, whoever approaches you and says that I want proof, you have to begin the discussion by what exactly what do you mean by proof? You cannot start off the discussion assuming that there is any agreement as to what proof is. By the way, side note, one of my favorite arguments in a position for an atheist is that what would they accept as proof for a creator? Because they actually get stuck. They actually have no idea of what they would accept as proof. That's a side note, okay? So just understand this first point. Anyone who comes to you and they argue, they just talk about proof without defining a level or a standard, they have no idea what they're talking about, and they're asking for basically an impossible. What they're actually doing is, it's sophistry. It's basically that they're talking like they're appeasing you, that I'm asking for proof, but because they've never bound themselves to a standard, anything that you present to them, they can say, sorry, I don't buy it, I don't believe it. The Big Bang, sorry, I don't buy it, I don't believe it. Logical necessity, don't buy it, don't believe it. The Quran, the fact that it's one, the fact that it's a miracle, the fact that it has this, it has that, sorry, don't buy it, don't believe it. They can dismiss anything because they have not set themselves a standard. You have not agreed what defines proof.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because it's it's almost like setting because conversating with somebody or debating is almost like a game. So you're setting out the rules of the game. So how do I achieve?
What is the win condition?
Yeah.
What is the win condition here? Because if they never give you what the win condition is and you're assuming what it is, it gives them liberty to keep changing the goalposts. So you have to fix where are the goalposts. And not only do you have to fix where are the goalposts, but is it fair for the goalpost to be there? You can't have the goalpost for a football match outside of the stadium.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. So this idea that I want absolute indisputable proof because that's the standard for truth. No, I'm sorry, Mr. Atheist, but where is your absolute indisputable proof? That absolute indisputable proof exists and should be considered as a standard for truth. Because if they can't win with their own conditions, why should they expect you to succumb to those conditions as well? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Hope that makes okay. So, right. So it comes down to agreeing what does the term proof mean. Hold on. Right. And this is the important point. Proof is made up of evidences. Okay? And evidence is a particular bit of information that points to a particular conclusion, okay? And you can have a variety of evidences, okay? Proof is what happens when you put all of these together and they begin to correlate and form a particular picture, okay? But if you conceal evidences, if you ignore evidences, if you misinterpret or misrepresent them, you can therefore also get the incorrect result, and therefore that's not actually a proof. So let's actually explore this a little bit. Okay. Oh, good question here. Is extreme skepticism a valid and reasonable position to hold? What is extreme skepticism? It's the position that you don't believe anything is true, that you believe everything is falsehood to begin with. Is that a valid and reasonable position to hold? No, why not? The answer is right in the middle of the page, by the way.
I'm skeptical it's in the middle of the page.
No, it's self-defeating. Because how can you hold extreme skepticism where you automatically believe everything is false as a truth position? Because then you have absolutely no way of reaching a true position. If you automatically assume everything that comes in is false, then what is the condition to assert something true? It doesn't work. Again, it's a self-defeating position. So this idea that everything is false until proven true, just verbatim, doesn't work as well.
Well, I mean, if we're dealing with like the scientific method, for example, and somebody has they have to assume something to actually have a starting point.
Yeah.
But to have doubt in it, that might be a little bit different, because what you're trying to go out to do is you're just, it shouldn't be either or. If you have a theory, then you try to move in that direction to prove it's right or wrong. But I don't know. I mean, if we're using a scientific method, I think that if you have a doubt in it, maybe that might be a biased, I don't know, that you're putting into the equation as well.
Yeah. There's a lot of reasons for it. I mean, but the point is that I want you guys to be aware of or to recognize is that you'll find atheists that adopt this position of, no, I don't believe in anything. You have to basically prove over and above the odds. Them holding that position in the first instance is not a reasonable position to hold, because they never ever apply that standard anywhere else in their life. But you see, the whole point here that I want you to get at is to start thinking about how do you come to know anything, and all of this comes back down to is knowledge. And well, actually, let's do this with an exercise, right? Was Fulan born to a virgin mother? Wait, could you not argue that if they hold that position, there's no purpose for their existence? You could, but it depends on what argument you're going to, I suppose. Right now, I just want to expose the logic of that position rather than give you actually an argument for it. So we're just learning the fundamentals, the framework here. Afterwards, at some point in the future, inshallah, we'll go into some actual arguments. So you'll see how this actually works in practice. But for right now, I just want you to understand the principles so that we can put them together later, inshallah. So the question here is, Fulan, it's just Fulan is basically a random name, John Doe. Was this individual born to a virgin mother? What do you guys think? So we have a lady, we have a female, and she has a son. And the claim is that she was a virgin when she gave birth to him. What do you guys think? Not possible? Why not? Okay, so you're asking for proof, but why can you not just accept that as truth just in and of itself? I want you guys to start coming up with reasons as to why that can't be credible.
Again, this goes back, in my opinion, this goes back to foreknowledge of what we have of how nature works. So, I mean, there is prior knowledge that we brought into the discussion that people don't, people aren't born from virgins. You have to have, you have to have sperm and, the egg to come together and then actually create a child. And so...
Here's their question. Here's an interesting question. What would an extreme skeptic answer? They would answer, was she already a mother? Well, it doesn't matter. She's a virgin. An extreme skeptic, here's the fun part. An extreme skeptic would have to answer that, yes, it is possible. Because, now think about this. Look at this, right? An extreme skeptic, here's the way that you can misuse and misapply logic and what a lot of people try and do to justify their position. First things first, when you see a person, when you see an individual, do you or can you assume by default that that person is not a virgin? By default. What is our default state when we're created, when we're born? Is that we're virgins, right? Therefore, the default is that you have to assume a person is virgin unless you have some kind of reason or evidence to assume otherwise. So, number one reason that she could be a virgin is the default is to not assume intimacy. We weren't there to witness anything, right? That's also then the second reason. We weren't actual witnesses to her having lost her virginity, right? Yes, truth seeker it is. Are you able to handle that? Number three, and not only that, because you might say, well, let's test her now, but Fulan's already grown up. There's no evidence that maybe she lost her virginity after Fulan was born. The point here was, at the point when Fulan was born, was she a virgin at that point? And we weren't around at that point. She might have lost her virginity afterwards. There's no test that we can do now to ascertain what her state was beforehand. But the point is, we're not witnesses, so we have to stick with the default there. Number three, artificial insemination is widespread and easily accessible. So she could have conceived that way. Number four is that the majority of the world, you have the Christians and the Muslims, which make up the majority of the world, believe in the virgin birth of Isa alayhi salam. So the fact that there can be a birth via a virgin mother is something that is accepted by the majority of the world. And for anyone who has seen that excellent documentary Dumbo, we also know that it's the stork that delivers babies, and therefore you can have a baby and without any need for intimacy at all. You just have to desire a baby really, really, really hard. Does that all make sense? Everyone's gone quiet. I'm not sure if that's a good sign.
I would unmic everyone, but there's a couple of guys that have like families in the background and stuff.
Yeah, I know.
Maybe.
But you understand what I'm trying to get to you here is to show you how logic can be misused and abused as well, especially by people who hold really weird views. And our challenge is to be able to recognize this and to be able to offer counter explanations that are holistic. Because don't forget, you see, each one of these individually, yes, whilst they are true to a certain extent, they're only true when you only consider that single aspect of a source of knowledge. When you consider other sources of knowledge and you look at the thing holistically, it doesn't work. Okay? And this is what we need to need to be aware of. So let's have a look at how we could answer such a point here. Is that we're looking for a plausible explanation here, right? So with regards to this idea that we don't assume intimacy on the part of anyone, yes, that's a true assumption. But here, she is the parent. She is the parent of someone. For the sake of keeping this thing halal, we'll assume that she's married. And the point here is that when you see a couple together, a married couple together, it's very, very safe to assume that they have been intimate with one another, because that's the purpose of marriage. So yes, whilst we don't assume intimacy on the part of anyone, the assumption itself is actually reversed in the case of marriage, because that's the point of getting married. I hope that makes sense. With regards to, and that also answers the second point as well. With regards to artificial insemination, yes, it's widespread, it's easily accessible, but it's also ridiculously painful, I assume. I've never gone through that myself, alhamdulillah. And it's also ridiculously expensive. Who in their right minds would go to that as the first port of call rather than trying to conceive the natural, free, and more fun way first? So itself, from a plausibility perspective, it's far more plausible to believe that if a person has gone the path of artificial insemination, they must have exhausted natural means first and therefore not a virgin. The virgin birth of Isa alayhi salam, yes, the majority of the world believes in this, but they believe in it specifically as a one-off miraculous event. The fact that it's a miraculous event itself negates it from being something that could ever happen arbitrarily by itself for anyone else. This was an exception, and being as an exception, it's not going to ever happen again. Otherwise, it wouldn't be an exception. So yes, whilst they do believe in that, again, missing off the part that it's a miracle, again, reverses that position. And finally, the stork, that's just a story. Dumbo is not a documentary, it's a children's cartoon. So again, we can dismiss all of these and see that, look, when you look at everything holistically, the evidences really just don't support this position. And what you have to come to, and ultimately this comes back to the point on the previous slide, defines proof, you have to come down to a position of reasonability, of plausibility. So let's define some terms. When you have the evidences, plausibility is when you have evidences that supports a particular position. Does that make sense? So you might have a whole bunch of evidences, and the evidences might say, well, it could be this, it could be that, it could be this, because all of these conform to the evidence. The options are this, 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 and this.
Yeah.
Okay? Proof is when there is only one plausible explanation. Okay? And this is a very, very important point to understand here now, that the standard of proof should be what you need to, and this is a very agreeable point here, and this is generally what's understood, is that if there is only one plausible explanation, that itself is the proof. Does that make sense? So until evidences come along that contradict that offer up other plausible explanations, this is the only, this is what they consider proof. As a side note, I don't know if we'll discuss this today or some other time, but this is why, from a scientific perspective, evolution is considered proven. Because all of the evidences, when you only look from a scientific perspective, from a naturalistic perspective, all point to life, evolving. I don't want to get too much into the terminology, but because there is no other explanation, because obviously they're discarding a supernatural influence, because it is the only explanation, there is no other physical plausible explanation. That's why they regard evolution as being completely true. So I hope that starts to make sense as to why the scientists believe in certain things or not. It's not because it's just what they want to. It's because from the rules of epistemology, that's just how you come to certain things. So just understand this point. You have, actually I've got a slide here. So you have evidences with regards to a matter. You have lots of different evidences. These evidences give rise to possibilities. Then you consider all of the possibilities and you sift out what is plausible and what is implausible. And if there is only one plausible explanation, then you consider that one to have been proven to be true. Okay? So an actual example here, Fulan born to a virgin mother, so the evidences are, well, the child shares the mother's features. Okay, the mother is married, she has older children, and the mother has given birth, and we're talking about someone from the 1800s. So you have the possibilities. There was a natural relationship, artificial insemination, surrogacy, adoption, stalk, miracle, all of these possibilities. But what is plausible? Because artificial insemination is not plausible in the 1800s. Surrogacy is not plausible in the 1800s. A stalk is not plausible. The miracle is not plausible. The only one that's actually plausible, and adoption is not plausible because of the sharing of features. So the only one that you have, which is a plausible explanation, is that there was a natural relationship that gave rise to Fulan, which means, being as that's the only explanation, it means that she cannot therefore be a virgin. And that's the proof. Does that make sense? And I hope you guys are following this. Yeah? Okay. Is that yes, no, or yes from before? Okay, cool. Okay, so this is probably one of the most important things. So if you guys want to take a screenshot or take some notes, this would be the point to do it, I suppose. Okay, so whenever we're arguing a particular position or a case or something like that, we need to use a proper argument. Okay, so what we're talking about here is not heated speech or anything like that, but it's basically, as it says there, a conditional series of statements or premises that lead to a logical conclusion. So for a strong argument, you need to have three conditions. Okay, number one is that your argument itself must obey the rules of logic. Okay, we're not going to go into the rules of logic now. I mean, they're quite basic, really. Really, if it seems logical, it's most likely logical unless there is a fallacy there. And you can go to this website, Your Logical Fallacy, to see all different types of fallacies. And it's probably easier if you know what a fallacy is. It'll be easier to recognize what is logically consistent, right? But basically, so long as your argument follows and obeys the rules of logic, i.e. it doesn't commit any logical fallacies, the conclusion of your argument becomes necessary. It flows necessarily. It means that it cannot be avoided. That's what, in this context, necessity means that it cannot be avoided. Okay? So long as your argument obeys the rules of logic, your conclusion will flow necessarily. Number two, and this is probably the golden rule, okay? The premises must be plausibly true, okay? Plausibly true means more true than their negation, means that if you were to test the likelihood, the plausibility, the reasonability of two different positions, for your argument to work, the premise that you use has to be more plausible or the most plausible than anything else, okay? And it's important here to note, it's a subtle point, but we'll explain it because it's there anyway. So there's a difference here between objective truth and actual plausible truth, right? So a mathematical formula, something like that, it may be objectively true. It may actually be true. But if you don't understand it, you can't accept it as plausibly true. So what you're arguing with your premises is something that you and your opponent intrinsically understand as being true. Okay? Regardless of the actual fact of the matter, you guys understand it and you take it to be true. Okay? Which kind of leads on to the third one, which is that the premises themselves have to be self-evident and intrinsically obvious. Okay? We'll do an example. Okay? So the point here is that you can't have a premise that is absolutely meaningless. For example, that, in my argument for the proof of God, that it was raining yesterday. That's absolutely meaningless. It helps. It's just random and obscure facts, okay?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, for the brothers that are listening right now, if they don't understand the basic structure of a logical argument, I think maybe that would be a little bit. Most arguments are based upon two premises or two statements, and then a conclusion. You can add more to that as well. So it's basically just statements itself. Just to add this for those people that might not know, this might be their first introduction into logic. So
we'll come to an example now, just to flesh it out. But I'll just look at all the definitions first, right? So here's the point. If all of these conditions are met, your argument is considered sound. It's considered a valid argument, and it needs to be addressed. It has to be given a response for. Okay. Okay, claiming ignorance is a red herring. Right. I'll skip that one for now. Okay. The way that you win an argument, and this is the fun part, the way that you win an argument is by what's called raising the intellectual price tag required to reject it. So let's just go through a very quick example of how this works. A very, very famous argument is called the Kalam cosmological argument. So this argument has two premises. Okay, premise number one is that everything that begins to exist has a cause. Okay, understand this very carefully. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. Premise number two, the universe, our reality, began to exist. Okay? These are the two premises of the argument. The conclusion, and this conclusion, you don't have to prove this because it flows necessarily. If you agree with the premises, the conclusion becomes obligatory. So the conclusion, therefore, is that our universe had a cause. This is implied to be the creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God. But that's basically the conclusion. Now, the way that an atheist would have to respond to this argument, to rebut this argument, is to challenge one of the two premises, at least one of the two premises. So he can either say, well, it's not true. This premise that everything that begins to exist has a cause, it's not true. This is not a true statement at all. At which point you can say, okay, Mr. Atheist, can you please give me an example of something that began to exist without a cause whatsoever? Now Mr. Atheist is stuck. He doesn't know what to do, what to say, and he's going to have absolutely no idea. For the sake of time, we're going to ignore all of the quantum issues that arise, because at the end of because basically he might say, okay, we'll cover it because I mentioned it. He might say, well, we see in the quantum vacuum that matter begins to exist without any cause. And here it's important to recognize that no, from a scientific perspective, we don't affirm that they're happening without a cause. It's just that we can't see what the cause is. From a scientific perspective, we still affirm that there must be a cause there because we don't scientifically believe in magic. But just because we can't see the cause, we can't recognize or detect the cause, doesn't mean there is no cause.
Yeah.
Okay?
Because making an assumption, it would almost be of the same level of of having faith, because you're saying you're having faith in the other end of the spectrum in that argument.
Yeah. So he might say, okay, fine, I'll have to concede with that. He might then go to the other argument and say, okay, the universe didn't begin to exist. Okay, what's the other possibility? He'll say the universe always began to exist. The universe always existed. Okay, Mr. Atheist, right. The evidences that we have on our side that the universe began to exist is the Big Bang, background radiation, the absurdity of infinite regress, yada, 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 second law of thermodynamics, first law of thermodynamics, yada, yada, yada. All of these evidences point to our premise being the truth. What do you have, Mr. Atheist, that says that the universe was eternal? And he will say, I got nothing, basically. So for him to refute your argument, you see what we're doing here is we're basically forcing him to come up. For him to justify his position, he has to basically perform intellectual suicide for him to win. And if he performs intellectual suicide, I mean, you've won the argument anyway. So I hope you guys are kind of getting the picture that once you understand how to formulate an argument and really to hold the guy to these two premises, because what you'll find a lot of experienced du'at, they don't mention the premises here like this. They don't say to the atheist, right, number one this, number two that, blah, 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 blah. They're doing it a little bit more subtly. You know, it takes experience to be able to just do it as part of a conversation. But you'll find the experienced du'at holds their person basically to counter or to react to these premises, and they don't allow the atheist to start talking about other different bits of matter. Hold the person to this and make him commit intellectual suicide in order to reject your point, basically. So either he'll have to succumb to intelligence, succumb to reason and rationale, and submit to the truth of the position of your argument, or he'll have to expose a flaw in your argument. And so long as you're using one of the sound arguments and you understand the premises and the rebuttals and the counter rebuttals, you'll be fine, inshallah. Now, let's come back to, just very briefly, this claiming ignorance is a red herring, because this is very, very important point, and it will come up a lot. One of the escape tactic now that atheists will use to try and get out of a position is they'll say, I don't know. I don't know. We can't possibly know. Okay? So so let's just go back to the first premise. Everything that begins to exist must have everything that everything that begins to exist has a cause. They'll say, no, it's not true. Okay, you ask for the evidence, and they'll say, well, we're not sure, but it's logically possible that it could exist. Fine. I will grant you possibly, maybe it's logically possible, but is it plausibly true? Is it, is there any evidences? Is there any basis, any reason, any rationale that conforms to this? Because whatever you bring will have to contradict everything that we've come to know. We have all of our scientific experience, our personal experience, knowledge, just the way that causality works. Everything points to things that begin to exist have a cause. Your argument of ignorance, and this is the important point to note, guys, the argument of or the response of ignorance is a subjective position. Just because he doesn't know doesn't make it an objective truth. Does that make sense? I hope this is a very important point. When an atheist says we don't know, fine, pick a position. Because we don't go through life based on unknowns. We go through life based on a supposition of one thing or another. When it comes to the nature of our reality, is there a God? Is there not a God? They'll ultimately come around and they'll say, we don't know. Fine. But you still lived your life, Mr. Atheist, assuming that there isn't. Why do you not live your life assuming that there is? Because they'll always pick the one that they'll find easier. So at the end of the day, whether they like it or not, they still live their life according to one supposition. When you wake up in the morning, are you going to die that day? You don't know. But do you live your life assuming that you're about to die that very next second. No, nobody lives their life in an extremely skeptical way. Because if you did that, you would never be able to cope with anything. You would never eat any food for fear of choking. You could choke on it and you could die. You would never eat any food. You would never drink anything for fear of drowning. You would never get into a car for fear of having an accident and dying. You would never enter a building because it might collapse upon you. We don't entertain these things or I don't know, because we still live our lives and proceed with the most plausible reality, for want of a better phrase in this context, which is that if I'm going to eat this food, no, the most likely outcome is that I'm not going to choke on it. It's possible, but in reality, I'm going to continue acting as though it's not going to happen. And they have to be intellectually fit and commit themselves to that in every aspect of their lives. They can't just arbitrarily change the rules when it comes to the nature of our, or the origin of our reality and the origin of life. Does that make sense? We'll come to this ignorance part again, because in my God argument, I basically smashed this one out of the park, but we'll come to that another time. But I want you guys to understand this point very, very specifically. If you guys understand the principles of argumentation, we haven't gone through practice with them yet, but just understand the principles that you have to formulate this argument, and once you present it properly, the person has to take down one of your premises. And so long as your premises are sound, there's no way for him to rebut them. And he has to basically submit. And that's where you win the discussion. Hope that makes sense. How are we doing on time, by the way?
Let me check.
Because we're kind of at a decent segue here, so I don't know if any of you guys want to stop. Like now would be the time.
It's been about an hour and a half now, so if we started at 11:30, so going to be 11:30 my time, so it's almost 1:08.
We'll skip the evolution stuff. Actually, should we do this really fast then?
Induction, deduction, yeah, basic logic. I think
okay.
Stop now. Brother Hamza thinks he should stop now. Maybe ask some quick questions and then continue.
Yeah.
You want to make one more point?
No, if we're going to stop now, let's stop now so we can have questions on basically what we've covered thus far.
All right.
That's okay.
Brothers, anybody, if you want to raise your hand, or I don't want to unmute everyone. So if you have a question, just raise your hand, if you know how to do that. Or you can type. It's really late, so let's end. Okay. Make sure to delete my face at the beginning of the video. Yeah, don't worry, brother, inshallah. It actually doesn't show up, I don't think. So I'm editing. I'll edit everything out, inshallah. Hamza got his hand, so you're unmuted. Go ahead, brother.
Yeah, so a little bit specific about the universe one. Because, I had that Sarah Stephen last time. He was saying that the universe exists as singularity. So it may have changed its form, but it always existed.
Fine.
How would you respond to the singularity argument?
What does he mean by singularity? Does it mean that it's outside of the laws of causality?
Meaning that energy has always existed and the universe just existed in a different state and it just became the universe. But prior to that, it was all in one singularity.
Okay, fine. So normally I would cover these kind of things in the God section, but being as you've asked us to do it now. The easiest way is to refer to absurdity of infinite regress. So with regards to our reality, our universe, nature, as you will, we are subject to the laws of causality, which means that for every event there was a cause before it, there was a cause before that, there was a cause before that. Or if you want to consider it as time, for every moment in time, there was a moment before it. Does that make sense? So before we were here, we were, praying Isha, before that we were praying Maghrib, before that we were doing whatever, and yada, yada, yada. And for every moment, there was one before it. And the arrow of time has progressed through all of those events to reach this moment now. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Right. Okay. Now, if there was no absolute beginning, it means that there must be an infinite series of events in the past. Does that follow?
Yes.
Okay. But if there was an infinite series of events in the past, could the arrow of time have ever reached this point? Because for it to do that, the arrow of time would have to have crossed over an infinite series of events to reach this moment. Is it possible to count to infinity?
No,
Is it possible to count from infinity?
I wouldn't think so.
No,
No.
it's not possible. It's impossible because infinity itself
Yeah.
it's not a real number.
But the main claim was that the fact that the universe is made from energy, everything is made from energy, so this energy was just in a different form, and this energy's always existed.
No,
So-
that's the point. But the point here being that this energy is still a natural physical construct and still bound by causality, because energy and matter are correlated. You know Einstein's famous formula, E equals mc squared? Basically, there's a relationship between energy and matter. Energy and matter is one and the same thing. They're just different forms. So you have energy that comes from the sun. It converts into matter into your plants, and when you burn the plants, you release energy out in form of heat and light. And the matter itself, the weight of the wood, it gets less and less, and you're just left with the ash. Energy and matter are interchangeable, but you cannot increase nor decrease nor create any of it. It's fixed in our universe. But the point is, regardless of the energy always existing, let's forget the fact of where did it come from and how does he know that and what's the basis. The fact that it always existed, it's always subject to laws, and it's always would have been subject to these events. And being as it's been subject to these events, there must, if it's always existed, there must be an infinite series of events that would have had to have happened prior to this moment. And that itself is an impossibility. Does that make sense? Not only that, if you want to go with a plausible argument, say, okay, fine. If you're talking about it always existing, all of the world's cosmologists, is pretty much consensus, is that the Big Bang theory, forget the actual specifics of the model, but the whole premise itself of the Big Bang, that our entire reality started from a single point and is now expanded, is agreed upon. There is absolutely no evidence. There is no basis. There is no physical evidence or any other kind of evidence aside from wishful thinking that prior to the explosion, so to speak, that matter was always prior existing. The only reason they say that is because that's the only natural physical explanation that they can come up with, which is a fallacy of scientism, which is what we will cover next time, inshallah, because I've got a whole slide on scientism and its own, and all of it.
Fantastic. Alhamdulillah. That's good. Then I look forward to that then, definitely.
Yeah, and I'll show you, wait, just to show you. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, so this is the basic argument for God. And you've got, obviously, I've got a more advanced one, which is based on causality, shows you chain of events, into Lord of the Rings, show you how all that works, and discusses the first cause and things like that, as well as other philosophical issues, infinity versus unlimited. So all those things can be discussed at a later point, but right now, the whole point of this webinar was just to understand the basics of logic and epistemology and argumentation to begin with, to give you the framework that when we go through those arguments, you'll be able to explain and use them effectively.
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
Okay, Jazakallah khair, brother. So I think that we should then close it up and then set up a time next week, maybe, when you come back to the UK.
Okay.
So we can continue on. But mashallah, this was a lot of benefit because especially debating atheists, because their methodology, I mean, this course is mainly focused on debating atheists. And
yeah. Well, I tell you what, the reason why it's easier to debate atheists, because they're already, 1/3 of the way towards the Shahada.
Yeah.
And the position I take with Christians or with any other person of faith is personally, I don't like to waste time breaking down the Christian belief and then building up the Islamic belief. I just take the shortcut and say, listen, you've got this belief, this structure in your head, prove it to be true in the first place. Prove any part of it. And being as they can't, you have to start from a neutral ground, which is nothing, and then you build up the positive case for Islam that way. So I actually find dealing with things from an atheistic perspective, it just comes down to how then do you explain it to others that makes it work. So that's why I kind of avoid learning too much about Christianity. Plus, I'm a very weak Muslim. Rather than learning Bible verses and the history of the compilation of the Bible, yada yada yada, I would rather spend my time and energy and memory and effort into learning about my own deen. Memorize the Quran, learn more about the seerah of Rasulullah and things like that. Because at the end of the day, in reality, all of this stuff, fine, is good if you want to go and debate those individuals, but don't forget our purpose was to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and ultimately attain Jannah on Yawm al-Qiyamah. Knowing more of the Quran and being closer to the Sunnah of Rasulullah, that's what's going to gain us higher positions in Jannah, inshaAllah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to be that bothered by how many Bible verses did we memorize.
Yeah.
The whole bunch of reasons why I prefer this approach after having done a lot of trial and error and things like that, as opposed to any other approach, which is why I'm against other approaches.